Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Tom Sweet, CIO of Industrial Refrigeration Pros. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of when someone's gotten past theirs. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the best solution at the best price. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Tom, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Industrial Refrigeration Pros and your role there as CIO?
Sure. So we're really not a household name for most people. So that's a fair question. We design, build, and service large-scale industrial refrigeration systems. So if you were to go to the supermarket, that would be done by a commercial company. But for us, we're mostly warehouses. You think of agricultural industry, food processing, large warehouses. So there's a little bit different design and system design there with ammonia or CO2 as opposed to what you might have in a supermarket or the Costco cooler section. So we started in 2001. I was a third employee in 2022. Excuse me. We started in 2021 and I was the third employee in 2022. So employee number 3. And I came from a VP of cloud role at a financial company, and I wanted to do something different. And this is definitely different.
Super cool. So let me ask you, that's actually, I have a bunch of questions from that, because I think on the one hand, I think it's really hard to kind of fathom the magnitude of industry, right? There's just so many people, even in the US, right? You're talking 300 million people. It's a mind-blowing number. And then you talk about things like even when you start warehousing this stuff and moving things around, it's really hard to imagine, the magnitude of all this. So it makes sense to me that on the refrigeration side, there'd be a huge opportunity when you're talking about warehousing, all the, the amount of stuff that is moving around the country and being stored is mind-blowing. So that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Even though I have a hard time picturing just how big this is. I'm imagining it's actually a pretty big market that people don't think about, right? So I think that's super cool. But the interesting part that I want to kind of get to here is being employee number 3. I think you're in a really unique position to be able to talk about, that whole market opportunity and the growth of the company being, in that CIO position from early on and kind of growing the company to where you are now. That process, I think, is really fascinating and fun. And so I'd really love to kind of dive into that and explore that so that you can kind of tell the story of the company and from your perspective of how that went, because I think that's going to be a really great example for people.
Yeah. So the CEO started it in 2021. He was a board member of the private equity firm for another portfolio company. And he came up with this idea to get into the industrial space. So he was employee number 1 and they acquired a company. And then he brought on a VP of HR. So she was employee number 2. They acquired a second company and they had that for a little bit. And then, the CFO and I came on as employee number 3 and 4. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting of the interview process, and this is how fast things can move. I had been looking for a different role, and I had interviewed like 8 different interviews with one company, and then they said, "Oh yeah, we're not moving forward." After 8 interviews, someone contacted me about this role, and what had happened was the CEO was looking for a CIO. He reached out to a consultant that was helping with the ERP. Consultant mentioned it to someone he knew. That person didn't want the role, but mentioned me. And I had a half-hour interview at a Starbucks on a Saturday morning and got the job. Right. So that's how fast things can move. And it's just a little bit different than kind of shocking in many ways. But We're about a 540 person company now, so we're continuing to grow. We've acquired 8 companies during this time, or 2 prior to me coming, but then we've acquired 6, and so there's a lot to that, and so I can be more specific if you can narrow down your question. I don't want
Yeah,
to just keep
actually,
talking and rambling. So
no, I think that's really kind of fascinating because there's a lot to unpack there. I mean,
mhm.
first, I think, okay, private equity guy, he's probably looking at what is it, an 8 to 10 year exit? Is he looking to kind of grow this thing and then exit? And does that change? Well, let me start with there. Is that kind of the plan, or no, just to kind of keep growing it?
I think they do want to grow it, but mid-cap private equity typically will sell to large cap at some point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's how it normally happens. Now, whether or not our private equity firm, decides to do that, I mean, that's not really my decision. But
Right.
but typically that has been a pattern in the past where you would have to do all this hard work. But it's a lot of boots on the ground work at this point, and then it's worth more money because you have done all that work.
Yep.
And then if they choose to sell it for their investors, then that would be uh, a move that they would decide after a
Okay.
period of time. Mhm.
So then as you acquire all these companies now, 8 companies in what is that, like 4 or 5 years,
Yeah,
that's,
about 3. So yeah, more like
oh,
three and
like
a half.
eight and
Yeah.
three.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a lot. How do you, from the IT side, how do you go about making, are doing this smoothly, right? I mean, integrating with the new companies, that's there's a lot going on there. Is there a secret sauce, like a formula that you've kind of come up with now to make this smooth and easy and make the integration smooth? How's this work?
Yeah, it has it's so they think of it in 2 different ways. There's an ERP system which is separate, and that would be really owned by the CFO and COO because that's where your finances, that's where your operations is. And our company, IT really, I mean, we'll help out with the ERP from a technical perspective, but the CFO, has to make sure that people are getting paid, that all the bills are getting paid, and that's something that the CFO and Chief Operating Officer both own. From everything else, though, that's IT. So what we really want to do is help educate the users and explain to them what's going to happen because most of these smaller companies have very limited Microsoft licensing. Everybody's an admin. There's no DNS filtering. There's no real sometimes no backups. Sometimes there's no IT at all, or been a couple of times when the person that they had helping them had either passed away or they don't have their admin passwords to the servers, right? There's all these different little nuances that you work with, but it's educating them and bringing them into a single tenant as soon as possible. I think that's one of our successes is we've been able to migrate from the day we bought the company on paper. 17 days later, we had their SharePoint and mail migrated and their computers enrolled in our tenant, and that was very fast. But against education, because we don't want MFA or all these little things that they have to educate them on,
Yeah.
and so for an IT professional, all this is second nature. But to a company that's been acquired and been told nothing is going to change,
Yeah.
well, in many ways, nothing is changing. They're still doing the same type of work they used to do. They're still getting paid the same amount they get paid. It's not changing at the macro level, but at the micro level, yeah, they have to have a different password than they had before. They have to sign in with MFA or now passwordless, but it's all those little things can add up, and you're going to be very conscious of those changes versus the other changes that are also happening from other departments. The HR system, they have to accept different policies for acceptable use, or for driving a company vehicle, there's a policy, or maybe their company vehicle changes because, we use a certain fleet company that maybe the other company didn't have. They just don't get to pick whatever truck they want from the lot, right? It doesn't work that way anymore, right? We have, it's when you get larger, there's different efficiencies, and it can't be run like 8 different companies. It has to be run as one company.
Well, that's a fair point. So I think as you integrate all of these, is it one of is that really kind of is it really challenging? I mean, that it seems like you'd be bringing on, are you bringing on kind of IT from them locally, and now they're just part of your kind
We've
of
never had
larger I
IT.
what's that?
none of them ever had IT. They either
There
had
you go.
managed service providers. So maybe they didn't have like a managed service provider, but often, when you look at what a managed service provider can do, there's like the bronze plan, the silver plan, the gold plan, the platinum plan, right? Often they have like the very, very minimum. And
Uh,
and so or and so we have to do work to dissolve that relationship, in a amiable way, and then migrate them over. But we've never acquired a company that actually had IT.
oh,
So
nice. Well, that makes it
mm,
really easy then, right? I mean, so you just that's well, okay, that makes sense. I guess
mm,
that explains how you can do, 8 in 3. And I guess the plan is you just kind of keep doing that. Is
mm,
the businesses that is the plan, right? You just go out,
yes.
acquire new ones, bring them in,
Mm,
and
mm,
that's brilliant. Love it.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Really interesting. I think that's fascinating to me because on the, Cyberlinks is an MSP. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to see how private equity works in the MSP space. I think the idea is very similar to what's going on in that the model of bring it in, consolidate it. The difference is it's really tough when it's IT and it's service, right? So
mm,
as you try to consolidate these, the whole plan, the whole model changes. It's not like you might have a small MSP, let's say it's got I don't know, a handful of techs, right? And now it becomes part of a much larger one that has their own, stack of products and their own way of,
mm,
and so now everything changes. So I think it becomes very disruptive.
yeah,
In a lot of industries, it makes perfect sense. I want to see it work in the MSP space. I just haven't seen it successfully work. All
mm,
the ones that do, and they grow quite large. The
yeah,
problem is their churn is so high. They're burning
uh-huh,
through so many clients, and it now becomes this model of client acquisition versus retention. They lose so many,
mhm,
but they're gaining more than ever because there's not a lot of great marketing in the MSP space. And so these guys get really good at sales and marketing because they've got kind of the professional side, but they kind of the service ends up suffering so much. So it's one of these things that I'm constantly trying to figure out how do we do that where we can kind of grow everything more organically and keep the service side really good we without because there's always that balance, right? You bring on a new client, if you're not careful about it, you overload your current whatever it is. If you've got X
uh-huh,
amount of support, right, like
mhm,
some support staff, if you bring on another client, it just happens to now be too much, right? Now that your service suffers, so you're always balancing kind of supply and demand. So
mhm,
it's really interesting. You can't just kind of like most industries, yeah, just produce, 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 bring in more clients. Yep. But when it's a service-based business, it becomes a whole nother another thing,
yeah,
a variable that you got to calculate. So
mhm,
I'd love to see that work out, and I can see
yeah.
the wheels turning. So let me,
Well, I
did
mean,
you
I'm
have some
just
thoughts?
thinking, right? What's hard, and again, I've released some MSPs, but in fairness, right, there is a managed service agreement. So what is provided, and if you sign a contract as an MSP, you're going to do 1, 2, and 3, and then the customer wants 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, that's you gave a price based on a certain deliverable, right? IT can be so many things. You could have people wanting help with an Excel document, right? Like I can't figure out Excel formulas and expect you to do that. Well, maybe that's probably not part of your agreement with them,
Sure.
or acting as a CTO, or developing new applications that support their business to deliver business value, right? That's possibly almost likely not part of that agreement. And it's kind of, it can be hard because people expect you to do everything with computers if you're the MSP. But if they pick the bronze plan, right, not the silver or the gold or the platinum or double platinum or whatever type plans are up there,
Uh,
then, they're, and I've seen a lot of companies have chosen the minimum,
yeah,
right? And
it's
then
true.
they're upset. It's like, well, you did also pick the minimum here,
Yeah,
right? So,
so true. Well, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really it's challenging, right? And that's the thing. I mean, on top of that, you're not only are you dealing with people providing the service, but it's
mhm,
a person to person, it's a personal interaction. So there's that whole dynamic as well. And so balancing all of that becomes a lot harder than producing a product, right? Or just
mhm,
so It's an interesting business model. Anyway, let's let's shift gears a little bit to AI. It's one of, I think it's everybody's favorite topic. Is this something that you're able to leverage, or that you guys are leveraging now, to kind of increase efficiencies and help
Mhm.
the business?
Oh
And if
yeah,
so,
I
what are
mean,
you guys doing?
absolutely. I mean, we have Copilot, Microsoft Copilot for a number of people, and that's kind of pricey. We also have ChatGPT team, right? So that's $30 per user, and that's also expensive for a smaller company, but nonetheless provides more value. We have a tool called SquareX, which is a browser detection and response. And we can keep an eye as to who's uploading files to ChatGPT, and we'll send a warning that says, hey, you know what? No company data or confidential stuff going to ChatGPT. And we can flag people, and if they need a commercial license, we'll get them a commercial license, right? I mean, we don't want to stifle business value here, but we can just keep an eye on it and say, hey, look at what are you uploading? If someone's like, no, it's fine, I'm just uploading contracts. It's like, well, no, stop, right? That is something that we definitely don't want in the training model. So we can get a corporate one that in theory is not supposed to be used for training.
Yeah.
But then we're doing an awful lot with agentic AI for coding. And yes, we are a construction company, but we use Windsurf, though there are other tools like VS Code or Cursor or Claude Code. And with management of systems, we use Microsoft Intune. There's a lot of PowerShell scripts and stuff, right? And we can have this write PowerShell scripts for us. And I would say 80% of our code, 85% of our code is AI generated now. Now, again, we're not a software development company. So, Microsoft is 40%. That's a different scale altogether. But if we said, hey, look at write as an Intune script that reboots every computer and accepts that list from a CSV file, and we can type that in, and it'll create the PowerShell code that we can then run with MS Graph, and then we can reboot a certain collection of computers from a CSV, and those are the types of things that can really accelerate, because just maintenance of systems, and when you're trying to keep the whole setup secure, there's a lot of care and feeding to keeping a company with a extremely high Microsoft Secure score, right? Keeping that score high, trying to figure out why these 8 computers aren't updating on Windows Update. Why is that? Trying to fix it, run commands to reset the Windows Update server. So whatever it is, and so the agentic coding can do an awful lot with that. And then now you have the new versions of Claude Code. There's many things that can be done through that. So just getting better and better, and there's a lot to learn, right? There's an awful lot to learn, and there's all these YouTube channels and all sorts of free training. So yeah.
Yeah, no, there really is. It's wild just how much, and obviously, right? I mean, we're at an age where the information is, and the development of technology is so much more rapid than it has ever been. And so keeping up on it is, I mean, it's a full-time job. There's always something. And I think it's interesting because now with AI, we're at this stage where it's kind of like the early days of the automobile industry, where there were, hundreds of automobile manufacturers, but it was, only a few of them make it through. And I think we're seeing the same with AI. There's a tons of AI apps. I think obviously, it's pretty clear that you're going to have things like the Chat GPTs, Microsoft, and Google. The big guys, have an advantage because of their size and the resources they can pour into it. And so that kind of forms a base. But all the little apps that pop up from there, that's I think kind of overwhelming, just how many there are, and there's just not enough time in the day to explore them all, to even think of how this could help you. So it's always interesting to find out how people are applying this to their company, to see what direction people are going, because I think those are going to be the winners. And I think Microsoft's clearly one of them. They're doing pretty good stuff there with integrated into the whole Microsoft ecosystem. So that's great. And the Chat GPTs really solid. The even the Groks. I mean, there's just so many great options out there. It's good to hear these different examples. So let me ask you, I think it's really interesting how everybody kind of gets into IT in different ways. I don't think there's one clear path to being a CIO. And so I think we've had probably over 100 CIOs on the show so far, and I don't think any two have had the same path to the same, very some of them have the same inspiration into getting into tech, but I think their path to CIO has always been they've been just so many different ways. So can you tell us your origin story? What kind of got you into tech, and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, I graduated with a degree in civil engineering, and I graduated not knowing how computers worked. And that's back in 91. And we had to take a Fortran class, but it was on the VAX. And if you ever use the VAX, you can't hit the backspace key. It's not user friendly. And I graduated not knowing computers, and I worked as a civil engineer, and I bought my own computer when I graduated. I had some money, and they were $3,000 back then, back in 91, for a decent computer. I had a friend who in mid 90s went to work for NEC. So NEC Computer Systems Division was selling laptops at the time. And he was in that time in Massachusetts, it was really magical. I mean, when you think back to the mid 90s, it was Silicon Valley or it was Massachusetts. That's where most of the high tech was. I mean, they didn't call it IT back then, they just called it high tech. And you had Digital, you had Wang, you had all those companies, 3Com, Ascend, Cascade, which then became Cisco, all of them back in Massachusetts. And I talked to him about getting into what he was doing. And he said, "Oh yeah, you can do this." I'm like, "I can't, how do I, and how do I do that?" Right. And I bought a couple books. They used to have computer shows back then where people would like buy parts for their computers. And I bought like a not for resale Windows NT4 server and built my own server at the house, and then eventually interviewed for the job. And it was a snowy day, and 2 of the 4 people interviewing me didn't show up because of the snow, but I showed up. And like they say, 90% of success is showing up. So I got the job. I moved from civil engineering, and I had worked at other companies, and I worked at Microsoft for a bit on Office 2010. I've worked for mining software. I worked for GM Financial, and that was the role I had prior. And I had built relationships in the CIO community and DFW and prior in Denver. So I built some relationships up, and that helped, because this job was only about relationships. I tried other jobs where you apply online, and again, you go through interview upon interview, and this was just different, and it was perfect. So that's why it moved.
Yeah, no, I think it's yeah, again, I love it. Civil engineer. I think that's the first one we had of those as well. And it's just wild. I think all too often people think you've got to be an Uber hacker by 16 and hacking into the Pentagon, or you're not going to make it in tech. And I think that's nothing could be further from the truth. We're kind of the I don't know. It's a very welcoming industry that people come from all walks of life into IT. So that's a great one. And I don't think I haven't thought of the old computer shows in, I don't know, 20, 30 years. It's been a while since I thought about one of those. That was a nice blast from the past.
Mm.
That's great. But it's interesting. You said that it's about relationships. I mean, I think one, yeah, success is about showing up, right? But it's also about relationships. And I think that a lot of people are kind of challenged by that in the IT world, because we really like it tends to attract people who like the technology. And I think that there's a desire for a lot of people to kind of focus on the technology and and ignore the human aspect, the human element of life, of their career and
Mhm.
everything. And
Mhm.
but did you find that too? I think we're of the age where that was always kind of important. I think the younger kids kind of grew up with, they grew up with the internet, right? So
Mhm.
for them, they were able to kind of dive into technology even harder and not have to interact with people as much. And
Mhm.
so I think we're seeing it more now. But did you find that to be, at all challenging? And if
Yeah. I mean, I'm shy, right? I don't, but I was reading an article. I mean, when I turned 40, I worked for Microsoft. And at the time, a bunch of people, it seemed like 40 was an age where you started having more challenges when you were there. And I just had to start thinking about, like, what am I really going to do? Because I was an individual contributor. at Microsoft and, doing my job and doing it well, I thought. And I decided like, hey, I got to really get my act together career wise here. And I started reading and then trying to learn. And there's a CIO recruiter named Martha Heller from Heller Search. And she had mentioned that, her at the time, her clients were looking for CIOs who were thought leaders, who spoke at conferences, who had a presence in industry. And that was the second time that came up because prior to that, there was a role at Microsoft at the time called technical evangelist. And I had talked to the team. I'm like, how do I become a technical evangelist? They said, this is the easiest job at Microsoft to get. I'm like, wow, tell me. They say, first, all you do is show us how you've been evangelizing all the Microsoft products with your blog and everything else. And then we hire you. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a blog. I don't have any of that. So I had to make a decision that I had to be more visible. I had to start attending different events and trying to post on social media and trying to be a positive influence. And that's an intentional decision on my part. And it's maybe not, I don't say it's phony, but it's just something I have to do in order to be visible in the field. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really interesting because that goes back to those early days. Now people would say, you've got to create content, right? It was the
mhm,
same thing. They were looking at
mhm,
it. It was just, that was the early, I guess, term for an influencer, right? A technology
mhm,
evangelist. That's where it all came from, right? Those the early days before there were online influencers. You know, because there was no social media. It
yeah.
was a blog and it was people who spoke at conferences. And so it's kind of fun to think about it. I hadn't heard that term in a long time either. And so did you find that to be challenging to do the blog, to go out and do, any, kind of speaking at conferences? Was that challenging for you or something that kind of
I just had to
surprisingly
learn how to
enjoyable?
do it. I just had to learn how to do it.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I think it's fine. It's kind of funny because as I spoke at a Gartner and Partner Pavilion a couple of years back, and this guy that I know was said that, when I'm speaking, I'm a completely different person. And so I just have to get on this different mode, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily like speaking in public, but I have to. So
Well, I know some people take on a different a totally different persona. They actually you make it kind of like an acting experiment, where they will give themselves kind of this whole persona, and they may, dress differently. They call themselves different things, and so for them, it's basically just acting. So it's not them, so they don't feel like it's a personal thing, and so they're not putting themselves out there. They're just playing a part in a whatever, a play, right?
yeah.
And so it's really interesting the psychology of what you have to do sometimes to get out there and perform, because it is a performance, right? So it's not a stretch to say, to make your mind kind of think, oh, well, it's not me. I'm just putting on a performance as
Mm.
whatever, right? Matt the speaker, Tom the speaker, whatever it is, right? And then
Yeah.
oh, okay, very fun. So that's interesting. Well, do you do anything now? Did you continue that and
I
do?
do. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I was keynote for DevOps Days a couple of years ago, and
Nice.
I maybe talked too long. Right, I'm kind of flashing a light at me to stop. Right, because sometimes you're doing your best, but it's timing. Timing is sometimes not always what you think when
Yeah.
you're practicing.
You know,
And
I,
I do a lot of podcast episodes and events where possible. I'm on panels and things like that. Right, and mostly in the DFW area, and sometimes what I think is challenging is when people are earlier in their career, they can't necessarily go to these events. And one piece of advice I have is volunteer for the event. If you can't go to a CIO event because you're maybe not director level and above,
yep,
volunteer to sign people in, right, at the booth, right? And then
smart.
you're getting exposed to everyone, you're hearing the same talk, and then you're getting FaceTime with a lot of these people. And probably getting more contact than the regular person who's there because you're signing everyone in. So
Right.
that's maybe something that those who are willing can try to do. So
That's a brilliant idea. I mean, that is there you go. That alone, it will will change the trajectory of somebody's career. That's
mhm,
brilliant. I love
mhm,
that. How
yeah.
about that? Yeah, that's a good one. Um,
Mhm.
huh. That's really interesting. So, um, Yeah, I think that's a great one because you hear advice like, if you could, if you're, just coming out of college or whatever, and you're in that position, volunteer to shadow somebody who's in the position you want to be, or you shadow some, company CEO and learn from them. And, if you can afford to do that, it's a great thing because you're going to learn so much so fast, right? But to volunteer there, that's pretty brilliant. I like
Probably
that.
easier to volunteer to do an event,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I was even thinking that myself for like some of these CFO or marketing events. I mean, when you go to a CIO event, it's just a lot of time it's CIOs looking for new jobs,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you go to the CFO event, all they do is talk about how they hate their IT and they don't know any good IT people, right? So, I mean, that would be a good event for someone to volunteer for.
That's great. So really the takeaway is go to CFO events where they hate their IT so you can
Yeah, or
get
the
the job done.
marketing team too. So,
I love it. That's awesome. Tom, this has been an absolute blast. I can't thank you enough for coming on. But before we go, can you tell
sure.
everybody where they can find out more about Industrial Refrigeration Pros and more about you?
Sure. Our website is irpros.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Thomas J. Sweet. I have a website that I probably should do more on, thomasjsweet.com. And yeah, I don't have an Instagram. And I'm on Twitter too, Thomas J. Sweet. Thomas J. Sweet, I guess, not the .com, but yeah, Thomas J. Sweet. So yeah,
Fantastic. All right, Tom, thanks. And until next time.
thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.